Please put your hands together for Bronwyn, Alan, and Peter. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Alan Addison, and I became involved as a younger person in adult and community education, school-based. I've been a teacher from my early life, and when I moved in, prior to that, I was involved in preschool education for a while over in Australia, and then I became involved in behaviour modification and special schools and working with special children. Once that exhausted me, I stepped into what I thought would be an easier life, and that was adult and community education based in schools. I was very fortunate where I was appointed. We used to have something called community learning centres in the past, and I became a community learning centre director or coordinator. There was only about 11 or 12 in New Zealand at the time. What that meant was we had extra resources and a full-time person, which has always been quite hard to find in adult and community education. So in terms of when I was thinking about what am I going to say, I just thought, well, my leadership journey started early on. I actually became a director of the preschool at age 27 when I was in Sydney, and I worked for the Sydney City Mission at the time, and they didn't know a lot about preschool education because they were mostly involved in drug and alcohol rehabilitation in Sydney. So when I used to go along to the meetings as this young person, I was always fascinated because what I did in preschool was totally different to what they were doing. And it's just a little interesting story there with my becoming a leader as a 27-year-old in a preschool in a country that I was getting to know. The bigwigs, the people who ran the Sydney City Mission, huge organisation doing lots of wonderful charity work. When I applied for the job, because it had been recommended by the previous director that I might get the job, they looked at me, and I found out later they asked questions like, what makes you think you can run an organisation like that, being the age that you are? And as we teased that out more, they thought I was 19 or 20. I used to have long hair in those days. So I had to correct that and say, no, I've been married for 6 years and I have a child. And on that basis, I got the job. And then it was a big learning curve from there. Another little aside on that, because I really, it's a memory that sticks with me, has stuck with me for a long time. Here I became director of a preschool with 54 children, aged 2 through to 6, in Redfern, if you know Sydney, right in the central, interesting part of Sydney. At the end of my first week, I had this father, he was Egyptian actually, they were an Egyptian family, came storming into the office, demanded to see me, and then proceeded to tell how he was taking me to court and that we were in big trouble for what we had actually done to his son. So I went into immediate shock. I didn't know how. I excused myself for a minute and I went and talked to an offsider. But what had actually happened is the day before, this little 4-year-old boy lost his cool completely out in the playground, attacked one of the other teachers, picked up a hammer and started to head towards some children, and he was out of control completely. So being the only male at the preschool, he was brought to me, and I took him into the office, which fortunately was like a glass house, and the other staff stood around me. Well, this boy for 2 hours, I kid you not, for 2 hours he was totally out of control as he swore, spat at me, kicked me, told me I was everything under the sun. And the only way I could restrain him was to hold him standing in front of me with my 2 hands. As a result of that, of course, he got some mild bruises on his arms. I'm just telling you this because it was really quite shocking at the time. And at the end of his rant and rave, 2 hours worth, he completely broke down, kissed and cuddled and hugged me, went out and kissed and cuddled everybody else and apologised. The father saw that, came in the next day with his wife, who had a black eye because he was a bully, and we knew that, and already had contacted social services about that, and started raving about how he was going to take us to court. one thing led to another. So the only thing I could think of at the time was, say, I stood up and got the phone and said, would you like to call the police? And he said, well, yes. And I said, okay, I'm going to call the police. And we also are going to lay charges because your wife is out there and she's got 2 black eyes and it's not the first time, and we think we need to report it. He got up, took off, and interestingly enough, the next day he got on a plane and went back to Egypt. So that was, as a new leader, that was quite a shocking introduction to leadership. So that was my introduction to preschool education. An interesting thing, I've just recently come back from Singapore where my son lives, and he's been a leader, a director of a digital marketing company. And when we started chatting, he suddenly said, oh, Dad, I've had enough. He's been there 14 years. And he said, I don't want to be a manager or a leader anymore. He was in charge of 50 staff in Singapore. He said, I'm sick to death of dealing with staff issues and dealing with, trying to attain the bottom line for the company, which I think he's done well. But for him, it's like 14 years of dealing with staff, and he decided he'd had enough. So coming back here to do his own business. I thought that was really interesting because that's part of what I wanted to talk about today, which I don't think has been heavily touched on in our leadership discussion this morning, and that is staffing. I think for me, and looking at people I know and colleagues and businesses and adult and community education, dealing with what's going on in your team, you need skills and toolbox of ideas to be able to handle the things that walk through your door every day. Now, I'm sure I'm talking to the converted. As Pani said before, you're all leaders in your own right. That's why you're here. It's because you manage and lead the little organisation or huge organisation that you're a part of. So I'm preaching to the converted, but for me, I just wanted to raise that issue around how do you deal as a young leader, like my experience, and I found the same thing with other jobs that I have landed myself in. And how do we become a leader? Do you want to be a leader? Those were questions that never ever passed my mind. Usually, and I would imagine many of you would be the same, we don't go out and look on LinkedIn and find a job with leadership as the title and say, I want to be a leader, I'm going for that job, it's $200,000, I'm capable of doing it. I don't believe that's how it happens in most cases, certainly not in mine. Usually you come in as an underling or you come in as part of a team, and then when positions come up, you either decide or not decide to be to apply for it. And you end up in the role where you're expected to be a leader. Where was I trained to be a leader? Well, I wasn't. It was, has been, and can be a challenge on a daily basis when depending on the size of your staff. Some of you have lovely little teams, and we talked this morning about creating family, whānau, working together with integrity and purpose, and things like that. Those things are all really important, but when the big issues come, I have always found, like my son has, and others with me, often used to get calls. I was 19 years doing adult and community education based in a school, and you get to know everybody in the country, and you get calls about, oh, Alan, this has happened, or this staff member's done that. What would you do? And all that. Those are the things that I feel we're not always well trained for. So I learnt as the years went by the importance and the value of mentoring and coaching and supervision was only something that was really offered to me or I took up as time went by. And the value of that is just immense. And I wished I had those kind of things when I started off as a young leader. Having a person outside of your organisation that maybe once a month or every 2 months you can go and table the issues for you, support for you. Your role as a leader, I have found as a leader, you're always supporting others. You're creating the team. You're trying to satisfy your board, your directors, the outcomes that they want. And it's up to you to deliver those things, often depending on the nature of the work that you do. Those things by yourself can really send you under. And I know many people who just got out of what they were doing because they didn't have the support they needed to be guided by a third party, by a supervisor, by a mentor who can look from the outside at what's actually troubling you. So that's one of the main points that I felt that I wanted to make today. And in terms of training to be a leader, well, I think you are you. And the way I see it is when you step into a role like that, you are taking with you your own toolbox, your own personality, your own way in which you have been brought up by your whānau, grown up through the ranks of whatever work you did in the early days, your own personality and who you are. That's your toolbox. That's your resource. That's what you draw on to be the person that you are, to be the leader that you are. I think that's something that we need to remind ourselves, and it's great if you can be yourself and use your own skills to lead whatever organisation or work it is that you're doing. This is from the Coaching and Mentoring Centre. I have a friend who's involved with this, so we had a talk about this. And this is what struck me as very interesting and important, that leadership exists in the spaces between people. So to me, what was that about? Leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that your presence lasts in your absence. I thought that's reasonably profound for me. And a true leader, I believe, looking at leaders that I have admired over the years, who I have reported to, it's what they have left with me, what I have learnt from them and has stayed. And with the organisation, your group, your team, what you say, what you organise, what you learn together, what you share, your shared values, it's what you are able to leave with them or leave with the person that you're working with in your absence. If change has taken place, then that's a really great thing. Probably many of you will have heard of Simon Sinek. He's a motivator and talks on leadership quite a lot, and he does podcasts and things. If you don't know much about him, it could be quite interesting just to have a look at what he's got online. But he talks about the why. And I find it very fascinating that he says that not all organisations, not many organisations actually, know what they do. And I found that really interesting. Your purpose, your motivation, what you believe. Why is the reason your organisation exists. So as a leader, to be able to, and you can't do this overnight or at one meeting, is together, you're growing together, working with your community, and the work that you do, but it's stopping and thinking, why are we doing it? What is the purpose that we are doing it? That is the fundamental thing to everything that you do. So if you don't want to be a leader, if you don't want to do these things, then you shouldn't. And then there's differences too, I believe, between management and leadership. And those are things that need to be teased out. Are you a manager? In which case you're a colleague, and you remain a colleague as a manager, sharing things perhaps, that's my take. Or if you're stepping up and becoming a leader, it's another level. And these things need to be thought through, what all that means. And the why is really, really important. I know it sounds like I'm running, I've got a lot more things I wanted to talk about. But the other, perhaps final thing I want to say is listening. I mentioned it before when we did our little activity. As a now older person, having been through many different organisations, schools, preschools, running my own business at a guest house in Auckland for several years. Learned a lot through that. Dealing with staff, running your own business and doing those things is different to working with community and your networks and those kind of things. But I used to observe, and I still observe today, how I go to organisations, I go to companies, I go to the bank, we go to power companies or whatever it might be, and you're going to talk to somebody, how people don't listen. We all say listening's important, but what does that mean? I'm constantly shocked how people don't know how to listen. And as a leader and a manager, to truly listen, to be present, There's been many times in the past where I've had one foot out the door. I need to go to a meeting down the road, community education meeting or meeting with a community group, and a staff member comes in and they have an issue. You listen, you think you listen, and you say you'll catch up later because you've got to go. And as I reflected on those kind of situations, because it's happened to me many, many times, and I'm sure to you, is when I refocus and think about my staff member's face when I stepped out to go to what I thought was more important than being present and truly listening to them. That would be something that I would pass on to you as being absolutely really important, that the bits in between, the spaces in between are really, really important. You get those right, and I think the organisation will roll more sweetly, nicer, and better all round for yourself and for the team. So, kia ora. Thank you very much.